Hello, everyone, and welcome to Yada Yada Law School, a fake law school where real law professors teach classes about nothing for charity. My name is Greg Schill, and I am the Art Vandelay Dean and Kenny Rogers Roasters Foundation Chair in Business Law at the Yada Yada Law School. I'm also an Associate Professor of Law at the University of Iowa. Today we are joined by Professor Brandon Hasbrouck, who will be teaching Seinfeld, White Privilege, Racism, and Space Traders. Following the class, Professor Hasbrouck will take questions. Please be sure to use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit your questions. Now, before we begin this class, which is our 12th and final class, I want to ask for your help one last time. As you know, we on the Yada Yada faculty have been teaching these classes all summer to raise money for COVID-19 relief. Now, thanks to the generosity you've shown over the course of the term, we are now very close to our goal of $15,000. As of this morning, we were at about 96% of the way there. And if you're hearing this now, we would ask that you consider making a donation or perhaps an additional small donation to help us get over the top. Every little bit helps. A direct link to donate will be added to the Q&A feature in Zoom. You can also find it on our website, which is yadayadalawschool.com, or simply by Googling Yada Yada COVID Relief. Now, without further ado, Seinfeld, White Privilege, Racism, and Space Traders will be taught by Professor Brandon Hasbrouck. Professor Hasbrouck is the Mr. Morgan Visiting Professor of E-Race Law at Yada Yada Law School. He is visiting from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air Law School, where he holds a permanent appointment, and he is also an assistant professor of law at Washington and Lee University School of Law. Q&A for this class will be moderated by me. Professor Hasbrouck, over to you for Seinfeld, White Privilege, Racism, and Space Traders.
Welcome to Seinfeld and Race. I'm going to rock the mic today. My lecture is entitled White Privilege, Racism, and Space Traders. I want to thank your dean, Greg Schill, for extending the most generous invitation. He told me that for all of my work, I will earn cash money. Fat stacks, as our friend Jesse from Breaking Bad says, that amounts to $0. It is my hope that this lecture motivates you all to donate a few dollars to the most worthy cause, Legal Services NYC. We are at 96% of our goal, which is $15,000. I am the closer, some call me Mariano Rivera, and it's my responsibility to get us to that important goal. So every dollar truly helps. Please consider a donation. My teacher assistants may make an appearance during this lecture. They are excellent at what they do and always come into the room bringing the noise, literally, as my teacher assistants are my daughters. In the words of Jay-Z, allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Brandon Hasbrouck, and I know nothing about Seinfeld. I mean, nothing. Full disclosure, when your dean reached out to me and asked if I would like to visit from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air Law School, I said, I never heard of you all. Like any great scholar, I decided to do some research on this institution, Yada Yada Law School. And I have come to learn that Seinfeld is a terrible show, at least on race. This class is my explanation. This class is built on the research of extraordinary critical race theorists and Black scholars. Today's agenda, we're going to do a little primer on critical race theory. We're going to talk a bit about space traders. I am going to tell you my thesis, provide you the evidence, reach a conclusion, and then we will get into Q&A. critical race theory. A brief primer on critical race theory, which is the lens I viewed Seinfeld under. In critical race theory, one of the basic tenets of it is storytelling to help frame the conversation. So I have a story to tell you. In 1998, I was about 11 years old. I just finished a baseball game. I was riding home with my father. We were pulled over. The officer, a state trooper in New York, had a shaved head, piercing blue eyes. He asked my dad to roll down the window. My dad did. He then asked my dad, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" My dad said no. He said, "Well, I pulled you over for speeding." None of you know my father, but if you did, you would know he does not speed. He actually goes way too slow, which always frustrates me, even as a young child. And my father said I wasn't speeding. And the cop said, "Have you been drinking?" My father goes, "Well, drinking what?" And he goes, "Alcohol." My dad said, "No." He then asked my dad to step outside the car, and he would then go on to dehumanize my father for well over an hour or more. The only reason why it stopped was for this reason. He said, "All right, my dad said, 'Are you doing this because I am Black?' And he said, 'Yes, I am. And the only reason why I'm letting you go is because the finale of Seinfeld's on tonight.'" The finale of Seinfeld is on tonight. At that time, as a young child, I didn't know what just happened was my father was racially profiled. Critical race theorists in general contend that the law constructs, naturalizes, and justifies racial inequality. Critical race theory aims to develop a jurisprudence that accounts for the role of racism in American law and that works towards the elimination of racism as part of a larger goal of eliminating all forms of subordination. It is a project of racial emancipation and anti-subordination, a project to dismantle all hierarchies. One of the founders, who you see there, of critical race theory is Kimberly Crenshaw. She is the gold standard for excellence. The other founder of critical race theory, who's also pictured there, is Derek Bell, Harvard Law School's first tenured Black professor. I assigned a must-read classic from Professor Bell's book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well: The Persistence of Racism. In the final chapter, The Space Traders, Professor Bell describes a fictive world eerily similar to the one we know today. A brief overview of Space Traders. Local and federal governments ostensibly had no money. Quote, decades of conservative, laissez-faire capitalism had emptied the coffers of all but a few of the very rich, unquote, the narrator of Space Trader says. Because of a host of poor choices, the country was struggling to survive like any, quote, third world nation, unquote, and financial exigencies, quote, curtailed all but the most necessary services, unquote. The parallels to our society today are acute. The environment was in shambles, as reflected by the fact that the sick and elderly had to wear special masks whenever they ventured out of doors. In the story, English-speaking extraterrestrial beings land on the shores of, you guessed it, New Jersey, and offered to solve everything. Gold to bail out companies, chemicals to unpollute the environment. The country could have this deal for one sweet, awesome price. Quote, all of the African Americans who lived in the United States, unquote. This was the central controversial claim in Bell's science fiction, that white people would sell Black people to aliens for the right price. The story concludes with a successful trade. 20 million Black men, women, and children are stripped to just one undergarment, lined up, chained, and whisked away like many of their ancestors, of my ancestors, centuries before. Bell's story lays bare the politics of disposability. So does Seinfeld. People of color are disposable in this sitcom. Indeed, in many ways, Seinfeld imagines a post-space traders world. Think about it. Seinfeld's main characters, all white, are often without jobs, yet somehow afford spacious Upper West Side apartments. They move about the world totally oblivious to their white privilege. A few observations. First, there were hardly any Black people on the show. By my count, maybe 19 appearances by Black characters or so. Second, Seinfeld's all-white world was constructed to make people of color invisible, and the only existence was to make the white characters and viewers feel superior. We were the joke. Finally, there is nothing provocative or edgy about Seinfeld concerning race. Their jokes then and now were always offensive, tying into centuries of racial terror and subordination, racist tropes, and narratives that perpetuate racist policies and laws. Simply put, this show is, and many of the people who played lead characters are, racist. To reach such a conclusion, I must have some evidence. Well, Seinfeld left us plenty. Let's take a look at some of the episodes. The Diplomats Club, that's from season 6, episode 22. The racist trope that all Black people look the same. It is this racist trope that allows cops to racial profile. You know, quote, you fit the description, unquote. We have seen this play out in national news, most recently when Senators Dan Sullivan and Marco Rubio posted a picture of Elijah Cummings while honoring Congressman John Lewis's life. Let me give you the setup of this episode. A white person says or does something completely racist, and to prove he is not racist, he says, I have a Black friend. That is what happened in this episode. After George's Black boss is offended when he tells him he looks like Sugar Ray Leonard, George goes out of his way to prove he is not racist by trying to find a Black man to pretend to be his friend. He stops random Black people on the street and asks them to play his friend. Finally getting an exterminator to come with him to dinner to meet his boss. Aside from being a super awkward episode, it insinuates, and many white people believe this, that you can't be racist if you can prove you have one Black friend. Next episode I want to talk about, The Wizard. This is season 9, episode 15. This is the episode that explores interracial dating without having any of the characters date an actual person of color. In it, Seinfeld's crew can't figure out if Elaine's new boyfriend is Black. Determined to figure out his race, Elaine asks several inadvertent questions about his heritage and engages in racial stereotyping. We have seen this recently play out with Amy Cooper in New York City. That is, when white individuals summon law enforcement on Blacks based on their race instead of objectively suspicious behavior. That relies on stereotypes that associate Blackness with criminality. Elaine, after hearing hip hop music blaring from her boyfriend's apartment and noticing his collection of African masks, becomes confident in his Blackness. She is so confident that she engages in racist talk, as if she understands and have experienced racial oppression and struggle, calling the Black waitress in the scene, quote, sister, and says, "It's okay, my boyfriend is Black." At which point, the boyfriend arrives and tells her he is, in fact, white, and assumed she, Elaine, was Hispanic because of her last name. She says she's not, and they conclude, quote, "So we're just a couple of white people," unquote. It is noteworthy that today, many actual interracial couples continue to experience racism in law, practice, and policy. I want to highlight another episode that is featured in season 3, The Nose Job. I did not include this as required material to review. In that episode, George dates a woman with a large nose, and she decides to get a nose job after Kramer says that she needs one. Aside from the obvious sexist issues with that, there are also significant racial implications. That has everything to do with the social construction of race. That is, white people constructed laws to bestow significance to the shapes of noses to legitimate all manner of social, legal, and economic inequalities. There were literally racial identity trials in which nose shape featured prominently. It was this kind of information, larger noses determining Blackness, that placed people in racial categories, which literally determined a person's freedom, whether their conduct was criminalized, whether a woman would be subjected to forced sterilizations, and so many more heinous laws, all to promote racial subjugation and white supremacy. Today, we may not have racial identity trials here, but there are racist ideologies constructed in law. For example, there are racist ideas about criminality, Black people, specifically men. When we see these racist ideas manifested in policing, which allows police to terrorize the Black community, this is why I have called for abolishing racist policing in my work. We see these racist ideas with terrorism. We associate that with Muslim. We see these racist ideas with undocumented immigration. We associate this with the Latinx community. It is important to underscore these points so that we all can do the important and hard work of justice to dismantle such racist systems and ideas. The next episode I would like to discuss, the Puerto Rican Day Parade. This is season 9, episode 20. That episode speaks for itself. I really do not have any groundbreaking insights about how offensive it is to burn a Puerto Rican Day flag during the Puerto Rican Day Parade, which is exactly what Kramer did in this episode. He caused a riot and then shouts, quote, "It's like this every day in Puerto Rico," unquote. As background, NBC formally apologized for this episode and pulled it from the rerun circulation. It is these racist ideas that sustains the unconscionable mistreatment of our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico, thousands of whom still do not have housing since Hurricane Maria. Next episode, The Cafe, Season 3, Episode 7. This episode introduces us to Babu, a Pakistani immigrant. Babu is this caricature and stereotype of Middle Eastern people who, of course, needs a white savior. In this episode, Jerry is the prototypical white savior who believes that Babu does not have the business acumen to market and run his new generic cafe that is open across the street from Jerry's apartment. After stalking Babu, Jerry tells Babu to bring different cuisine to the neighborhood and suggests that the restaurant be Pakistani themed instead. The restaurant fills, and Babu continually yells, "You're a very bad man." Later on in the series, Jerry accidentally gets him deported, and the scene is remarkably construed as comedy. The problem with the white savior is that it simply reinforces white empowerment and supremacy, the same sort of white empowerment that resulted in the oppression, which is now being resisted by people of color. The white savior motif deprives people of color of agency, which this episode underscores. For those of you who are interested, I have written about white saviors in the Legal Academy that was featured in the Washington Post and in a law review article. The Cigar Store Indian. This is season 5, episode 10. This episode, in which Jerry buys a stereotypical statue of an indigenous person and gives it to an indigenous woman named Winona, without knowing her ethnicity, I guess it revolves around an ongoing joke that Winona thinks Jerry is racist. Somehow, Winona agrees to date Jerry, and eventually Jerry uses the racist slur, Indian giver. This myth is perpetuated among white people. It is this notion that indigenous people have so frequently, recklessly, and materially breached their promises to the white man as to render promise breaking a defining feature of their character. Indeed, a feature so defining of their character and deeply entrenched in American culture as to justify applying the name to the promise breaking of all the world's people. It is not coincidental that promise breaking is the evil that has been uniquely visited upon indigenous people by the white man. The best known example is the United States historical breach of promises with respect to indigenous lands. For example, the Northwest Ordinance ensured indigenous tribes that, quote, lands and property shall never be taken from indigenous people without their consent, and in their property rights and liberty, they shall never be invaded or disturbed unless in just and lawful wars authorized by Congress, unquote. The United States repeatedly and violently, as in genocide, breached that promise. White people came to this continent and killed millions of native people through famine, war, disease, and forced removals. white people justified that genocide by characterizing native populations as savages. And then this narrative of racial group differences was used to justify centuries of slavery. Then there is the Chinese woman. This is season 6, episode 4. This is the episode that Seinfeld fetishizes Asian women. 2 quick comments. First, there is no Asian woman in this show. Again, it was a white woman with the last name Chang. Second, when it comes to fetishizing people of color for stereotypical or race-related attributes, you're engaging in extremely harmful behavior that puts unwarranted emphasis on race by sexualizing it. How Seinfeld deals with race should be a surprise to no one. The people who played lead characters have promoted racist ideas and engaged in racist thinking. Indeed, Steve Bannon collects royalty checks on Seinfeld to promote his racist ideas. You know, the guy who says being a racist is a badge of honor. I provided 2 videos for your review in the epilogue. In the first, the actor who played Kramer, Michael Richards, during a stand-up routine, wished, among other incendiary racist remarks, that it was 50 years earlier so he could lynch Black men in the audience, terrorize, brutalize, and torture the Black body. He would then call them repeatedly the N-word. Jerry Seinfeld, a few years ago, made it clear that he had no interest in race and racial diversity, calling it PC nonsense. In the end, how should Seinfeld be remembered on race? Just as it was intended to be, an erasure of people of color, specifically Black people. We are to remain invisible and only visible when we are expendable, as in Space Traders. Thank you. I welcome questions and comments.
Well, thanks very much for that excellent lecture, Professor Hasbrouck. Obviously, I imagine everybody on this in this class, I'm a big fan of the show, but there's no question it had a lot of problems. And I thank you so much for illuminating some of the more serious ones for us today. Going to the questions, we have, a few questions along the lines of the following. I think that most people would interpret episodes like The Diplomat as making fun of the racist tendencies of people like George, as opposed to making fun of the African-American characters directly. And there's no question in my mind that there is some ridicule of the characters going on here. What is your sort of take on that? And how does one balance that with some of the other kind of deeper assumptions that undergird the characters?
Sure, so a few kind of thoughts on that point. The first point is this. Anytime you engage in racist thinking, I think it's extraordinarily problematic, even if you're trying to highlight a funny point, especially when the Black person is the butt of a joke, right? And you gotta remember, predominantly the audiences, right, for this show were white. And the laugh becomes about the Black person, not necessarily George being racist. It's like, yeah, we all do this, right? We all introduce that one Black friend to prove we're not racist, right? And we're not if we have one Black friend. So I think that's my first comment on the question on, well, are we using it to show these characters had racist tendencies? We know all of the characters had these tendencies. It's what the audience is receiving on the other end. And to be completely frank, as a Black man who, again, I did not watch the show as a young kid, grew up really poor, and watching these episodes back in preparation for this lecture, I found them offensive. And maybe that's just one Black perspective. I did not find them funny at all. So I don't know if it was educating the white audience on race and racist tendencies. I think the opposite happens. I think it reinforces white supremacy in the thinking behind thoughts that white people think they could get away with, which is, yeah, I have that one Black friend, so I could say this, or I have this one Black friend, so I could do that. And that seems to be the baseline whenever you call out someone for a racist thinking or an idea.
Thanks. Another question is, one of the smartest characters ever to appear on the show is the lawyer modeled after Johnny Cochran. Of course, that would be Jackie Childs. He is slick, but after all, that is his job. You care to comment?
No, not really. I have no comments on that character. Sure, he's the lawyer. He's smart. I guess he's characterized as slick. Again, I think it's one of these. I think it taps into kind of all these racist thinking and that was going on during the O.J. Simpson trial and so on and so forth. So I think it's just tapping into some narratives that had white people really upset and angry during O.J. Simpson's trial. So I don't find that particularly even that character to be a silver lining in the show.
I think he was pretty clearly, he may have been good at his job, but he was obviously caricatured.
That's right.
In a problematic way. Okay. We've got a question.
Then I want to be clear, we should be drawing these links on when these characters are being introduced, right? And not only caricatures, but what's the context of those characters. And that's very important, right? Seinfeld's tapping into at that point. There was a lot of racist hatred going on then. You got to remember, same time while all this is happening, there's being laws passed to continually criminalize Black people and Blackness. And so we can't separate the show from its time period either, and when they're bringing these characters up in the white hate that was ongoing at that time period towards Black people.
Absolutely. Actually, in that vein, we've got a question. Are there still laws on the books today that have not been amended that directly affect people of color today?
Yeah, there's that's a whole lecture in and of itself. There's an extraordinary amount in every area of the law that subordinates and promotes kind of racist thinking. You could go in any area. Criminal law, you have stop and frisk. You have in civil law, you have it everywhere. So yes, there's a lot of laws that need to be reworked and dismantled and in some cases abolished outright, that criminalizes, that penalizes, that hurts Black people.
We've got a question about how law naturalizes racism. I don't know if that's a sub aspect of law and racism that you want to speak to.
No, I really don't have much comments other than, critical race theory teaches us, generally speaking, right, how these laws were created, what were they in response to. For an example, drug laws were always response to racial concerns. For an example, opiates were criminalized, marijuana was criminalized, and cocaine was criminalized, all because of concern that the Black man, the Asian man, the Latinx man was going to rape white women. Before, they were not criminalized until that point. And there's so many other bodies of law that develop along that same line.
And I've got a question here about how one kind of reacts to these things now. So the question is, How do you and how does CRT, or critical race theory, propose confronting particular moments or episodes that are now so clearly racist, i.e., not no longer airing a particular episode or editing it to leave out remarks? You mentioned the one about Puerto Rican Day Parade not being syndicated, but that doesn't feel like a very satisfying solution. Or I guess alternatively, this person suggests leaving it as is as a kind of historical fact to see what people once thought, at least some people thought, was once appropriate.
Yeah, so I've been touching this a little bit in my own work, right? I teach at Washington and Lee, and there's been a lot of attention behind at least one namesake, and I've been drawing attention to the other namesake. One namesake getting a lot of attention, Robert E. Lee, right? He was the general for the Confederate Army, and the other is George Washington. And the idea and the thoughts going on, especially folks who don't want to remove names, tear down statues or contextualize statues, are saying, whoa, 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 they were a man of their time, right? Stop erasing, stop the cancel culture. A few thoughts. One, erasure, that's what white people have engaged in throughout our country in the history of America. They've erased Black people, they've erased women, they've erased LGBTQ contributions to society. That's my first comment on this idea about erasure. The second thought is no, in my case with George Washington, in the case with Seinfeld, as I mentioned earlier, those episodes were always racist. They were then, they are now. And I think it's important that we name them as such. That's what I am doing in this piece that I wrote for Washington Post. I think George Washington perpetrated racial terror. He was a slave owner, and there was a lot, everyone talks about these hard choices, right? He was a man of his time, and he had to unify a country. And what I like to do, and the same thing with Seinfeld, I think the same examination applies, is let me tell you what the Washington had. He did not have to engage in the institution of slavery, owning Black people. He did not have to accumulate his wealth on the backs of Blacks. He did not have to beat and mutilate the Black body. He didn't have to sign laws in place so he could chase his runaway slaves. He did not have to have his teeth, his dentures, based on the pulled teeth of his Black enslaved people. He didn't have to allow his adopted son to rape Black women on his estate. The same is true with Seinfeld. He didn't have to tap into these narratives. And if he did, he should have been honest in doing so, engaging in kind of this truth and reconciliation process in these, right? And the reason why I decided to give my title The French Prince of Bel-Air is that show is, in a lot of ways, is remarkable in the sense of the hard subjects, right? And how it had to tackle with Carlton and race and policing and the criminal justice system. And you had those deep moments where there was a lesson to be learned. Here there was none. Here was this reinforcing white ideology, privilege, and supremacy using Black and brown character, people of color. So we must call it for what it is. It was then, it is now. So what we do moving forward, you could choose if you want to not watch it. You could, the syndicated episodes, I think Netflix is about to drop them. And there should be disclaimers about these things, in my humble opinion. Personally, I don't plan on watching. I only watch a few episodes to engage in this hard and difficult assignment that you gave me, Dean. But I don't plan on watching any of the other stuff. It's not a show that I think I'm going to get anything out of other than to leave it pretty frustrated. So, I don't plan, my children, I don't think are going to watch, my wife won't watch it. And so moving forward, what other people decide, I think it's your own choice, right? And there's a choice, and I get the First Amendment, I understand all of that stuff, implications, but we need to be able to name things for what it is, in my opinion.
We've got a question about TV today. Do you think that this has changed for the better, portrayal of Black people and other people of color? Do you think this has changed for the better in modern TV shows? Is there more diverse representation? How do we think about this in terms of not just actors, but plot lines and writers' rooms and so forth?
There's a lot of work that needs to be done. That's not an area that I study, although I have looked at statistics still really poor, and we need to do better on all fronts in the media. It matters. A lot of people get their news, and the media has the media has a significant role in dismantling kind of these racist ideas. So it's my hope that everyone engages in kind of these race conscious decision making processes, like Hamilton did, for an example. Sure, I understand the critique of Hamilton, where right, you're trying to bury some subplots down, slavery being one of them, because you have casted Black and brown people to play major characters. I understand that concern, and that's a critique that I share. But the good about Hamilton, I think, is this race conscious thinking about who are we casting, what are the images, who are we portraying. That's important, right? It's important. Not in TV, but someone who is a part of kind of our national conversation and in our consciousness is Senator Kamala Harris. All right, my daughter, when it was announced yesterday, who's 6, said, Daddy, she looks like me. She's beautiful. That stuff matters. Our children are watching. So I hope that we have better representation in our movies and TV shows, and I hope we're tackling themes that are important to our society and making it better. And that's the whole goal behind critical race theory, is dismantling these systems of oppressions and providing something new, something transformative, something that ensures racial equality, justice, and equity.
You mentioned Hamilton as a current example that kind of gets at a couple of questions we've gotten along the lines of how can comedians deal with race in a sensitive, appropriate way today? Hamilton, of course, not a comedy. Comedy traditionally has been edgier, and so that's been, it's been a more fraught area in some ways. I assume race can be dealt with thoughtfully, and I could think of some examples that come to my mind. But as somebody who's an expert in this area, can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. No, I think it can be, and I know Jerry Seinfeld recently. His perspective is we don't want to be PCing comedy. Comedy is our last great stop, Dave Chappelle says, in terms of our First Amendment rights. Dave Chappelle makes the argument that the moment we start kind of engrafting our values on comedy, that destroys the First Amendment. And that's the reason why we have the Second Amendment, is what he argues. But I do want to give a great example of how I think comedy can tackle race and racism. Dave Chappelle just did that. He had an open outdoor, because of the pandemic, event after the George Floyd murder. And he tackled it. And he did it by adding some comedic flair in it. But it was so moving, so powerful. And I encourage all of our viewers to watch that video.
We've got a question about the actors themselves who played these. It's not clear to me from the question whether the question concerns the main characters or the people of color who played those kind of marginal roles where they were often the butts of jokes. But do you care to comment on either the choice of the main characters to be in these scenes, notwithstanding the problems that you mentioned, and then the choice of other folks to be in those marginalized roles?
Well, I think Black people and brown people have every right to everyone else to work and to earn a paycheck and to make a name and to get their portfolio out there and to build it. And oftentimes you see Black actors and actresses comment after they played a role that they're frustrated with themselves. They are not happy that they took that role back then in their career, but they comment that what else do they have? There's no roles available for Black and brown people often. That's important to note. That's something that I think we lose track of. The expectation is black and brown people, you guys should be protesting. You don't want to work. That's just the wrong idea. That's not where the attack should be. The attack should be full frontal on the white writers and the white lead actors. And too often, I think we expect black people to sit on the sidelines, right, and not take certain edgier roles when that's the only role that's being offered to them, because of all these other white supremacy and white racist ideas that are and policies that are implemented with these organizations. That's where the attack needs to be. That's where attention should be at. But you hear it all the time. Viola Davis recently said it. I'm so disappointed in myself for taking on this type of role. I should have never done that. But I had to. I had no choice. If I wanted to make it in this business, or I wanted to have a chance, or I needed to feed my family, this is what I had to do in this line of work. But it's important to tackle kind of the power structure. That's what critical race theory focuses on, these power structures that we need to dismantle. And I would encourage all of us to start thinking about that.
In that connection, we've got a question about bringing it back to law. So where does the true work begin in dismantling the laws that affect people of color? How is this fixed? Of course, that could be not just another class, but a whole, in fact, there are many classes and books and so on that. But do you care to offer any thoughts on that?
I think everywhere. I think there's a whole abolition regime building, and there needs to be deep thinking on all of these issues. So where I'm focusing my personal energies right now is on criminal justice transformation. I wrote a piece that's going to be out with the UCLA in print, law review, talking about abolishing racist policing. And it explores defunding the police that could help out with a lot of these issues, which is essentially taking money away from policing, reimagining public safety, and then putting that money into other things, schools, is a big example, mental health treatment, counseling, all of these other housing. These are all related, and it requires all of us to give it our best thinking to provide a better path forward. But one thing, if you want to become a lawyer, is you leave oftentimes frustrated. Like I leave my job after I teach a class in critical race theory. I'm not happy. I'm not excited. I'm usually deeply depressed or frustrated from that class, right? Because these things still exist. These ideas still exist. It's not like, we've come far if we've come anywhere at all, or are we just essentially calling things by different names? It's important, and I hope that all of our listeners engage in this important work.
In that connection, bringing it to today, we've got a question about Curb Your Enthusiasm, which, of course, is another Larry David production. He stars in that one, as well as being a writer and perhaps a producer, I don't know. So the question is, since Larry David wrote the Seinfeld show, have you seen any of the Curb Your Enthusiasm shows? And doesn't he run the same theme in a lot of them?
One, I don't. So I can't comment on that, although it is my understanding he does. So I think my critiques would be very similar to the writing. I guess he wrote, 6 of 8 seasons of Seinfeld, my understanding is. And so my critique for those 6 seasons will be the same if they're similar, if Curb Your Enthusiasm is a similar kind of thinking that's being employed there.
Okay. That's all the questions we have time for today. But thanks everybody for joining us, and big thank you to Professor Hasbrouck for sharing his expertise and perspective with us today on Seinfeld. I want to encourage everyone, if you haven't had a chance today yet already, to go ahead and click through the link that's in the Q&A to the donation page to COVID relief via Legal Services of New York City. Thank you all so much for joining us on this adventure this summer. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep in touch.
Thank you all. Please donate.